Hi everyone, thank you for joining me at the AI Expo Africa 2021. This is RPA Made Easy. My name is Rudolph Janse van Ransburg. I am the CTO at Treasury One Automation. Before I get into the agenda, what I want to leave you with today is a sense of how to deploy RPA within your business. What are the typical pitfalls that to look out for, and what are some tips and tricks to make this a successful and as easy journey as possible. To get to that, I'm going to first go over a little bit of where we are with the RPA market at the moment. I'm going to cover our platform, Automation Anywhere, or our partner that we use for RPA deployments, the different types of RPA journeys, common pitfalls, and then some tips. So where are we with the RPA market? So very interestingly, as you can see that the RPA market has now passed the early adopter phase, and we are now actually moving into the early majority. So if you were considered yourself an early adopter, unfortunately that time has now passed on a global scale. And now essentially enterprise RPA is part of the software landscape of every company, similar to what a ERP would be like. And what I found also very interesting from Gartner is, according to their research, 90% of large organizations will have adopted RPA in some form by 2022. So that's the market update. Now I just want to move on to a little bit of news on Automation Anywhere. So obviously very important for us and one of the main reasons why we chose and partnered with Automation Anywhere is the good news is that they are now a cloud native platform. And there's obviously been some expansion in that. And with the cloud native platform, they now have 54% of the global cloud market share for intelligent automation. And also first in Africa, with this being the Africa AI conference or Expo, they are the first in Africa to launch in the public cloud in AWS in Cape Town. And the platform has expanded quite a bit to now include process discovery. Again, these tools are now I think about 18 months old, so it's not brand new news, but obviously a process discovery. And very recently, within the last 12 months, expanded into RE, which is a digital assistant, which brings automation sort of to the masses, if I can put it that way. So the Automation 360 platform, as it's now been rebranded, covers 4 different segments: discover, capture, automate, and optimize. So on the discovery section, as I mentioned previously, we now have a discovery bot, which allows us to do process discovery. And the reason why we have this tool is to shorten the time frame between a process being identified and that process then getting into production. And how we do that is essentially by installing an agent on someone's computer or their local PC, and the bot or the agent that gets installed then actually tracks their movements, their mouse clicks, captures what they download, where they log into, what calculations they do, what validations they do, and then saves that as a pre-completed RPA process and then gives it to someone like us to then complete the process development. So again, just shortening that time frame from process identification to getting it live into production. So on the capture side, we have the IQ bot, and that is for data understanding. And what we use it mostly for is to take unstructured data, which in most cases would typically be something like a scan document, and then we convert that into structured data so that the bots can read it and process it into whichever system you need us to process it into. And then on the enterprise RPA side, we have 3 different bots. So a typical attended bot, a bot that gets actioned or activated by a person or human in the loop type of bots. The unattended bots, which is again probably the most widely deployed ones, are the bots that sort of work in the back end. You trigger them with an email, or they run on a schedule, and whatever they do in unattended mode, which means that no human is in the loop or no one is telling the bot what to do. It completes its full cycle of process in unattended mode. And now we have the RE, which is the digital assistant. I do invite you to look at some of the videos that we do have on RE. We will most likely have some on the booth. If you can't find some there, please go onto our website or go into the Automation Anywhere website and look at some of the videos so you can get a sense or a feel for what Ori actually does. But what it has allowed the platform to expand into now is workflow capabilities. So as I mentioned before, you've still got the unattended bots, which does everything sort of in the background. But now we've got the ability to build our own custom web forms and make decisions based on the data that gets extracted by the unattended bots. And whilst we do that workflow, we can send it to someone for approval. And we've also got different queues that we can manage. So if you think about a typical example would be a call center. Call center agents typically interact with 4 to 5 or 6 different applications, depending on which channel the communication is coming in from the client side. And they sometimes need to access these different applications to perform a single business process. So what Ori allows us to do is to create our own customized web form for that specific process. And every time we need to take an action, the user will actually just use the Ori web form, fetch data, send information back, make decisions. And from a management level or a control level, you can actually follow all the different steps within a queue. But like I mentioned, please go and check out some videos on Ori. And then obviously we have the optimized, which is the bot insights. So bot insights, what it is your RPA cockpit, right? So it gives you a good feeling or a good sense of everything that's happening within your RPA deployment. So moving on to some of the more practical things that I want to talk about today. Let's talk about COE staffing. So COE, or Center of Excellence, as it's more commonly known, what is it actually made up of? So the most important thing that we have in a COE, hopefully, is an executive sponsor. So whether that be the CFO or the CIO or the CEO even, we need an executive sponsor that drives or it forms part of our Center of Excellence so we can make sure that we deliver our RPA solution that is fit for purpose for that specific company. Then we look at the second part, which is very important, is the demand generation. And this is where we always say that demand generation needs to be sitting within the client's company. So demand generation, those are the process owners or the people that understand RPA and RPA's capabilities and actually go and look for and find processes that are fit for purpose for automation. So that's sort of demand generation driven very much by communication and sort of expertise in different processes or business areas that then go and fetch those processes that the RPA team or the COE needs to automate. Then you've obviously got your developers. So again, skilled people that understand the platform very well, understand the business processes, have a vast experience in using RPA, deploying a specific platform, that then actually take those business processes and go and build an automated task or a bot, what most people call it, that actually performs the tasks or the automations that we want to do. Then we also have a very important role, the business analysts. So the business analysts are the ones that takes the information from the demand generation team, typically do a walkthrough with the process owners, documents it, and essentially then speaks to two parts of the business. On the one side, or two parts of the process. On the one side, they speak to the process owners to say, look, this is how we understand your process and this is what we're going to build. And the second part of their communication is actually talking to the developers. So they will tell the developer, this is how you actually need to build this process. These are the validations that you need to build in. These are the applications you need to access, etc. So just documents the process. And again, we do it in a very simplified way. But we do need to make sure that both business understands what it's asking of the COE, and then the COE knows what it needs to go and build. And then obviously, if in large deployments or in any type of deployments, the larger the size, the more important this becomes, is monitoring. So you need a monitoring team to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And typically what the one function that people don't always think about that we put as a very important aspect of a monitoring team is sort of planning for capacity. And so we typically need to understand how much time of a bot is a specific process going to use, and make sure that we forecast that demand going forward to make sure that there's enough capacity for the specific bots, make sure the scheduling works, correctly, so that we don't sort of run into any issues from a capacity point of view. And most importantly, from a COE, is to create harmony between business and IT. So there's always this big debate, or there used to be a big debate in any case, and in RPA in terms of who needs to drive it. Does business need to drive the project, or does IT need to drive the project? So again, that would depend on who the sponsor is, but you do need those two teams working together in harmony, because if you don't, you will not be successful. Every process that we touch with automation, we need application access or server access, or servers to be set up and created, etc. And that's where we always need IT's involvement. And we also need to give them fair warning to say, look, this is what we're actually going to do. Make sure your InfoSec team is informed of what's going to happen, and sort of get their approval and buy-in during the process. So I do realize this slide is blank, but I want to discuss different types of RPA journeys. So we've come across sort of a very different range of IT or RPA journeys. So some of our clients where there's more of a departmental focus. So let's say, for example, the finance department comes to us and say, look, we want to automate AP, AR, general ledger, report to close, procure to pay, those types of automations where it's one single department, where you don't actually get into the operational side of a business. In those cases, most of those clients decide to fully outsource the whole, or use all of our services, which include hosting, development, business analyst, monitoring, etc., except for demand generation. So that demand generation, we would in any case or in any situation, we would always leave that with the customers. So those are the customers that focus on the departmental. Then you get the customers that want to do sort of a full automation, or some people call it digital transformation, whatever the case might be. But this is typically if we go across multiple departments. And then some of our clients choose to, again, in most cases, use our development skills, and then they will perform business analysts, demand generation, monitoring, etc. on their side. And then we also get the clients that typically want to use us just in the beginning to assist them to sort of get them up and running. This is your typical sort of proof of value type of situations. And then they want to take our skills, and then we need to transfer those skills onto their internal developers, their internal monitoring team, etc. And that's really where the difference comes in terms of what's the best fit for your organization. And there's certain things that you need to take into consideration. First thing is that you can be flexible. So if you're not sure whether you want to fully invest into your own team, you can always leverage or lean on the skills of your partner initially, or even for 6 months or 18 months, whatever the case might be, and then make a decision to decide, look, is this a skill that we want internally, or is this something that we want to keep external of the organization? And typically what we've seen is different types of scenarios for different clients. The ones where everything is a lot more sort of centralized, if you run everything from the center, then typically those clients want to have their own RPA developers, the whole full COE internally. Clients which are more decentralized typically tend to lean on our skills a lot more, just because it works better for a company which is managed in a more decentralized manner to use the external resources, because then actually you move the responsibility of making sure that the time is saved, or whatever the case might be, whatever the goals of the project is, move that responsibility away from the center and into divisions or subsidiaries or different business units. So getting to the common pitfalls. So one thing that we've seen happen quite a bit is that companies tend to, or in some cases clients or whatever the case might be, would like to manage an RPA project in a waterfall or a traditional IT project type of sense. Now, there's a few reasons why there's not a lot of companies that still use the waterfall approach. But what you must remember from something like RPA is you can build as many things into a process, um, error handling, checks, balances, etc. The chances that the business or the process owner has given the information 100% correct with every single business rule that exists for that process before that process can go live is really, really scarce. So that's why you need to be a bit more agile in terms of how you run these things. And when agile, I don't necessarily mean the whole agile with stand-ups every day and sprints and those sorts of things, because every single RPA process or task that you need to automate can consist of 100 different things that needs to be done. So again, if you're going to sort of an analysis paralysis and you're trying to manage every single task within a process, you're just going to keep spinning and not actually getting anywhere. Another thing is that if you have not implemented RPA yourself, somewhere external, and even if you think you understand the processes really well, don't put a preconceived list of processes in front of someone and say, look, this is where we're going to go. We're going to take these 10 processes and this is what we're going to implement. You need to sort of negotiate or communicate with those things. It's better to agree the processes upfront in conjunction with your partner and actually exposing them to as much of the information as possible regarding those processes, and before you decide on the final list that you want to go with. Then we also get we need to fix our processes first type of scenario. And again, this is something that comes out of RPA projects that's not always get measured. We're always trying to measure FTE savings or time saved on specific processes. But typically, if you have a very good experienced partner, they can look at a process for, have a walkthrough for 30 minutes and then probably tell you whether this is a good idea or a bad idea, or no, go change this, go change that, etc. So thinking that your processes are too bad to automate, actually fixing things and making things more logical is a sort of a benefit that you get out of RPA, which is not always necessarily measured. And in most cases, if we go through a process and we think that your internal applications can actually do a better job, that is a good partner, is one that tells you rather go and fix this in the ERP instead of just using RPA. So you need to make sure that you don't use it for things that you shouldn't really use it for. But that goal going through, no, we need to map out and fix all our processes before we can do RPA. That's almost never the case. So I just want to go through a couple of tips. Communication. So communication is very, very important. So when we deployed RPA within our own business, I think this is probably one of the things we did the best, was communicate. So we actually got everyone together. We said, look, we're launching RPA, and the reason why we did it was explained to the full workforce. In our case, it was to make ourselves more scalable. So we wanted to remove manual work from people which are highly educated, and we wanted to make ourselves able to add on more and more clients without necessarily growing headcount. So scalability was important for us, and we communicated that to everyone at the same time. Name the bot. So again, this is sounds very silly, but just giving the bot or the program or the project, whatever, a name, just sort of humanizes it. And we've seen that it really helps a lot, especially where you think you might have some resistance or there's a lot of fear of automation. Just giving the bot a name just makes it a lot more fun, and just gives that human side to the bot and to the project ourselves. You can see our bot, the Treasury One automation bot, we named Logan. So it's the human name for the Wolverine, and Logan is quite famous within our organization. Have at least 3 pots on the boil. So typically when we deploy RPA processes to our clients, we always tell them, look, you need to have 3 or 4 processes on the go at the same time. You don't want to do a one by one by one by one. And then the reason for that is there's in many cases, again, you can go into analysis paralysis as much as you want, but in many cases there are some sticking points, or processes get stuck because we're waiting for specific information, or maybe a specific project to finish, or whatever the case might be. So it's always good to have at least a list of the 10 next processes that you want to do, but you want to work on at least 3 or 4 at the same time, so that if any one of those ones gets stuck, you just park it or pause it and then slot in the next one that's on the priority list. Choose the right partner. So very, very important. So as we've gone through, our experience in RPA, what we've seen is, for example, where there's a customers where we have done obviously very similar processes, those things go really, really quickly. The more and more that we do them. So when you're choosing a partner, think about their experience, what they have done, because you can typically save a lot of time if you choose someone that has a lot of experience in that what you do. Also, you're looking for someone that has a wide experience in different systems or communicating to different ERP systems. So typically, obviously, in 90 or sort of say 100% of our clients, we are interacting with some ERP. So the more experience you have, the more ERPs you typically join in or get exposed to. And every time you see that ERP again, it's just a lot quicker. And a good partner actually starts building up their own sort of internal bot store of bots that they've built, where some of the common functions in the different ERP systems, they know very well and they can do it. Our experience obviously comes a lot from having done it ourselves within our own company. So all the mistakes they were to make, we didn't make all the mistakes, but we have experience of actually doing this within our own business first, learning our lessons, and then we make sure that our clients don't make the same mistakes that we did, and obviously do it better than we deployed it in our own business. Process owner responsibility. So typically what we've seen sometimes is, yes, you have the COE where you need to staff that and you've got the demand generation. But once it comes to actually implementing a process for automation, it's better to give the responsibility for that automation to the actual process owner. So I'm talking, in accounts payable, I'm talking like someone like a accounts payable supervisor for something like invoice processing, whatever the case might be. But the responsibility to drive that implementation must sit with the process owner, not necessarily with the COE itself. We just find that it just works a lot better, and there's a lot quicker communication instead of putting people in the process unnecessarily. And then one thing that we've done quite a bit is we're trying to simplify the process analysis. That's going to be my next slide and the final slide. So implementation, simplifying the process communication. So what we've done is, and again, I've seen some analysis of different processes before we actually start, before people actually start automating them, and it's got like 15 columns and 15 different things that you need to track. So for example, is the process going to change within 3 months? How many different applications, etc., etc., etc. So if you ask business process owners, which again we like to give the responsibility to actually drive the implementation of their process, if you give them something like that to complete, you just sort of completely overcomplicating the process. So we've tried and simplified it. We tried to simplify it into 4 different items, which I'll touch on. So again, this is just an example of a last transaction volume invoice. Sorry, I'm using invoices again. I know it's the most common thing that people use, but it's unfortunately really easy to understand and explain. So that's why I always like to use it. So we look at the trigger, we look at the extraction, we look at the validation and recalculation, and then we look at the processing. So again, when you think about a bot, think about it needs to be triggered, right? So do we run it on a schedule? Do we trigger it with an email? Do we make it go pull a folder? Is there an API that's going to trigger that bot to do its start? So on the trigger side, there can also be specific things that you need to look out for. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Monthly? How frequent does it happen? and what sort of things do we need to look out for? Do we need to build in validations on the trigger? So if it's an email trigger, do we say the email has to come from a specific domain or a specific person if we want to trigger a specific task? So again, something that business users or process owners understand quite easily is the trigger. What is the start of the process? Then typically we need to extract information from somewhere. So do we need to extract information from an email? Do we get a CSV file? Do we need to go and extract information from a database using a SQL script? Do we need to extract information from a PDF? Do certain things, but in most cases we need to extract information from somewhere. And when we extract that information, there's certain rules. Do we make sure that there's 1,000 lines in the file or just 100? Do we make sure that this file follows on from the file that we received yesterday? We make sure there's no duplications, etc. So again, extraction is something that business users understand quite easily and is easy to explain, and then also for us to understand to build it. Then we also have to do validation and recalculation. So this is where you apply your business rules or the business rules for that specific process to the bot. And again, this is something that sometimes gets missed out when we talk about how powerful is RPA. Yes, it can do all these things, but what I found, one of the best things is that if you give it 50 rules, business rules that it needs to follow, it's going to follow those 50 business rules every single time. So validations and recalculations. Again, unfortunately, referring back to an invoice. So again, what is a valid invoice? A valid invoice contains my VAT number, if on accounts payable side. So my VAT number must appear on the invoice. It must obviously come from my name must be on the invoice, and then I must make sure that it comes from a supplier that I'm familiar with. I need to make sure that they calculate the VAT correctly, which again, unfortunately happens sometimes that it's incorrect. And we need to make sure the line items stack up or complete back to the total. I also need to make sure that the invoice number is not a duplicate. And in most cases where we do three-way matching, we need to make sure that our purchase order number appears on the invoice. So we would extract that purchase order number, go to our ERP, check that it's a valid purchase order number, and then we can actually start the processing. So again, we would validate, recalculate before we do the processing. So again, we're not going to waste time logging into an ERP trying to process an invoice when we actually can check before we do the process that it's going to be a duplicate, right? And then we process, in this case, again, the invoice. So do we do a mass upload? Do we go through the front end? Do we actually create a file and integrate it into the back end? And in this case, do we reconcile against an EDI? And then obviously very important, after we've done the processing, and again, processing has rules. Do we have a login? Do we have the correct login details? Do we have access to the correct modules, etc.? And then once we're done with that, how do we communicate? So once we finish the process, and obviously during the process, if certain validations or if anything fails at a certain point in time or information is missing, most likely, then we have a set rules that we need to communicate to. And also very important, once we've processed something, what do we do? Do we file it somewhere on a file server, or do we just email back to the user to confirm that we have actually processed their request successfully? Again, these four things we found really simplifies the process. And once you simplify it down to a process level and you make it easy for process owners and business users, most likely in most cases, to communicate these four things to you, then you can build a process quickly and successfully. And obviously, that's sort of the building blocks of a successful RPA deployment, taking into consideration some of the things I've mentioned earlier. Thank you very much for your time. I'm not sure how long I took because I did not look down at my watch. I think I'm within the time. Please shoot any questions that you might like to have. If you want to make contact with us, we're obviously a certified Automation Anywhere partner. We actually awarded the first Center of Excellence certification from Automation Anywhere in Africa. Please go to our website, www.rpa.treasury1.co.za. Send us an email go to our website. Please make contact and yes, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.